courage to push through whatever fear that you're having and not letting that own you is really important. And I think our toxic leaders are doing just the opposite of that. They're hiding behind the fear, or they're letting that drive their actions.
Welcome, I'm your host Stefano, and this is When Leaders Talk, a podcast about leadership, and most importantly, about leaders. And talking about leaders, we always refer to good leaders, but this episode is very much focused on bad leaders, toxic leaders. And I've been talking about this with Kimberly Williams. Kimberly is the Vice President of People for Walker Advertising, and she's also a former diplomat. She's been working for the Department of State in the United States for many years before turning her career focusing on people and HR. And actually, she's also an advocate for helping people dealing with difficult leaders. And that's why in this conversation, we've been talking about toxic leadership from many aspects, including tools, legal instruments, and more inner instruments that a person can use when they find themselves with a toxic boss. So there is a lot to unpack even in this episode, and it's a great conversation with Kim that will give you a lot of food for thoughts, I'm sure, about this. Before I leave the floor to Kim, let me remind you to subscribe to this podcast to make it more successful and have great conversations with great people like this one, even in the future. Plus, you can follow me on my social media accounts like LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and visit masteryourseat.com if you are interested in coaching and leadership coaching with me. Well, with no further ado, Kimberly Williams. Kim, you have a very diverse experience. Looking at your resume, you work at the Department of State, and then the last few years, you've been focusing a lot on people, HR, and this kind of positions. So I guess the question of your definition of leadership is going to be pretty much complete if you want. So what is your definition?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was a long, winding road in a lot of different places for me. But I think part of what shaped it in terms of coming from being a professor to working for the State Department, then to going to HR, is really being a strong communicator and having a high EQ so that you can really connect with people. Because at the end of the day, you're going to get the best out of folks when you make them feel safe, when you understand them, when you make them feel heard, and to translate that into action where you're kind of laying down the right environment for them to be able to go and be their best.
All right, so EQ, communication, and setting the right environment, those are the key words that I've taken from your definition. But I know that recently your work has been also focused a lot on what is not a good leadership, what is not a good leader, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Toxic leadership and toxic environments and these kind of things. And actually, it's something that I will cover, and it's on the next episode of this podcast. I will have a conversation with a colleague of mine. His name is Stefano too. He's Canadian though, but his name is Stefano. We'll talk about the dark triad, but I don't want to go there. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go there yet. I mean, what is? Do you have a definition of toxic leadership then? Since this is a focus of your work.
Yeah, I think someone who's incredibly fear-based. At the end of the day, it's kind of like communications I always view as really key, and that includes not running away from hard conversations and really getting in there, even when you're doing something at risk or you feel like personally you're on the wrong side of a political situation, or that you may encounter some fallback from the conversations that you're having. I think that courage to push through whatever fear that you're having and not letting that own you is really important. And I think our toxic leaders are doing just the opposite of that. They're hiding behind the fear, or they're letting that drive their actions.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. What I wonder is nowadays there are a lot of podcasts like this one about leadership books, and you can see a bunch there, and a lot of things that, to help people get better, plus coaching, plus I don't know, name a tool. There are so many
Yeah.
for leaders to be better in what they do. What's the situation now? Do you see any real improvement, or do you see a lot of leaders that they have maybe the presumption to be good leaders and yet they are not that good and they create a toxic environment?
Yeah, I think we have to be really careful with the tools that are there. I've worked with some incredible coaches. I know some incredible coaches. I also know some kind of bad ones. And so I think the tools can kind of go either way. But at the end of the day, it's really whether that leader has that heart to do that right thing and is really ready to kind of step into an arena and take on everything that comes with it, that really kind of propels change in a big way. And for me, when I work with different leaders on like how to navigate that space, I like to try and look for what are some small wins. And then also giving them a cone of silent space where they can say things out loud, even if they're not going to say the right things out loud, and not have to worry about stumbling through their words, so that we can kind of get to the heart of what's really going on and really help them there. So I think, there are some tools that can help folks get there. I think that there's some great people that can help folks get there. But at the end of the day, somebody's really got to be willing to do the work.
I like what you say when we're talking about say things out loud, even if it's not the right thing, right? Just say out loud. And what I've seen, many people are paralyzed by, they it's like they don't want to, they fear expressing themselves because what happen if they say something wrong, something that is not smart, something that is, and that kills the conversation and take a lot of take a lot of out from the growth and the exchange of ideas and these kind of things.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
So what is a tool that you can suggest to try to avoid to fall into this trap?
So in the State Department, we did something called murder boarding. And and it's not pleasant. It's why it has such a terrible name. But early in our training, we had to get together with like a group of 20 or so people, and they would put a camera on us, and they would ask us terrifying, nightmare, horrible questions. And the idea of the training was to prep us so when we're in a hostile press environment, and that's going to happen. But I think it can apply for internal situations as well. And so I remember going first in my class, voluntold, didn't offer, and, dreading it, and did a horrible job, and then what was so bad is they're asking me questions and I'm like, oh, this is awful. And, and I'm stammering and I can't really respond well. And then they play the video back and they keep pausing it and saying, okay. They have my peers say, oh, you're doing this wrong. And I'm like, oh, thanks a lot. And so then they had me do it again and again and again. And by about the 10th time, your nerves are gone. It really takes the pressure off. It brings the temperature down, and you're not so scared as you were the first time. And this is something you can even do yourself. Like if you know something's coming, you generally have an idea of what kind of questions may hit you, or you just want to test out a scenario and see how it goes. You can just set up your iPhone and record yourself and play it back and say, oh, I'm scratching my neck because I'm nervous and that's a tell, or, my voice is going up and down and I don't want that to happen, or I really stammered here. Let's do it again. So that when you're in that moment, it's not your first time.
Basically, what you're suggesting is get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Not just once, not twice, but more and more time until you're comfortable being outside the comfort zone. I don't know. I know it sounds strange, but actually, it's a great tool. I did something similar in the military, just a few times, fewer times, I guess. But it was a great experience. We were simulating after some exercise. We were simulating a press conference, and of course you got the benevolent press, your friend, the one who shares your ideas and values, and then you got the people that are against you, and they try to put you on the spot, and take you, make you feel uncomfortable, and as you say, stutter and making weird noises with your mouth. But
Yeah.
it's a great training. It's a great training, not just because you need to communicate properly, and you say at the beginning, right? A leader needs to communicate, but also because you will always find yourself in an unpleasant situation. You will find someone that is not aligned with your ideas and with your beliefs and values. What are you gonna do? Just shut down and
Right. You have to
suffer in
engage.
silence?
Yeah, I know. We don't move very far, and it can, on the opposite side, things can get very destructive, and people feel less safe in an environment like that, and there's less trust.
Absolutely. I love what you say. You less trust, less trust. Absolutely, especially in a setting like a brainstorming, where you want ideas to flow, and trust is the fundamental piece of it. Because if I don't feel trusted, if I don't feel like I can really express whatever it comes to my mind without any filter, and that's the beauty of the brainstorming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just let it go, let it go, and that's where the wisdom of the crew comes out. If you don't have these, it's not gonna work.
Right.
Okay, that's an interesting start, I would say, of this conversation. And I wanna actually continue on this flow. I wanna ask you, in your experience, what is the situation where you felt paralyzed or
Uh,
unable to react?
yeah, no, there was one particular time where I had to respond to my own boss. And I was working, I was an HR chief, reporting up to a chief executive who was just a low grade terrorist, in my view, just, really mean spirited, had really torn people apart for quite a long time. And I had gone to the board because at the top of the organization, there's not too many people you can go to. Um, and I didn't have majority support. They all knew that there was a problem, um, but for some of them, it wasn't impacting them. They weren't being mistreated. And they felt like, this person was a high performer and gave them what they wanted. And so, kind of too bad. And so, being left to my own devices, I had to basically figure out how I was going to respond in that moment. Did I want to just swallow it and try and keep going? And I didn't. And so I had to address them directly. And I remember being pretty scared in that moment. In fact, I was so scared, I actually drafted this person an email at my desk, and I didn't even hit send. I ran to the parking lot, and then as I was driving out of the parking lot, I pulled out my phone with a draft email and hit send. Driving away. And I always like to tell that story because it's okay to be scared. It's a very scary thing, especially the first time you go through it. But in the end, it really protected me. As we went down the road, it put them on notice. It put the organization on notice, and it was out there in writing. It was discoverable, and it shifted the entire dynamic to one where all the pressure was on me to figure out how to solve this nightmare scenario, to now they're on the hook a little bit because it's out there.
That's thank you for sharing this. I mean, I understand that as being a particular moment of your career, and that's what I get is also probably the pivot moment in your life when you decided to dedicate your time and efforts in helping those who find themselves in a similar situation. What are the tools that people might use when they have to deal with a toxic leader?
I think one of the most important things you can do is definitely to write things down. Whether you decide to act or not, you have to build up some sort of record somewhere. And so anytime I start to run into problems with anyone, the first thing I do is create a Google Doc, and I just start, you know, at 6:15 p.m. at this meeting, this was present, and I do just the facts, ma'am. This statement was made, or whatever the problem is. And then anytime I hear something, and so I just kind of keep a running log. It also, because these things can become very emotional very quickly. It helps kind of keep your train of thought on track, which is really significant, because how you show up in moments of conflict, kind of like what we talk about with the murder board, any type of hard conversation, you want to try and bring as much calm as you can.
Right.
Not only for your own self, to keep your own emotions from kind of overcoming you, but also changes how the other side not just perceives you, but responds to you. And so someone who can figure out how to hide their fear, swallow it, hit send in the parking lot, do whatever they have to do to show up in a calm way is very different than the person who shows up who's scared out of their mind, or rambling, they're incoherent, they're not presenting very well. Because for management, what they're going to do is they're going to look at the person who's not presenting very well, saying, okay, they won't do well on the stand, they'll crumble under the pressure of an investigation, they're not very threatening. The person who shows up who's very articulate, who's very clear, who's just the facts, ma'am, is far scarier. This is someone that would show well outside of the organization and present bigger problems for them, and they're going to take that complaint far more seriously.
Well, if I may add something to it, is when I had the experience of dealing with a terrible boss, one of the things that really helped me was a network of people I could trust, and they could support me. And I was lucky because these included family members, but also colleagues who found themselves in a similar situation. So we created on the ship, because I wasn't on a ship at the time, a small community. And like every time when you find yourself in a challenging situation with others people, the challenge itself creates cohesion among the people, right? Create the people blends better, in a way or another.
Trauma bonding is what it sounds like.
Yes, right. And it worked. It was a way to survive, to avoid falling in trap of quitting, or even though it was hard, because my motivation in the job, of course, was very, very low. Yeah, this is another tool. This is another tool that I would suggest. There are others, I'm sure. But one of the things that strikes me and is that many, I don't want to say many, but it's not about some toxic leaders, they still have success, right? Depending on what success can be defined. But especially if we refer as success as the having a good career, reaching the top of their organization, blah, blah, blah. I've seen some toxic leaders succeeding despite all the damages they were doing. What do you think is the reason behind this? Let me call it apparent success, because...
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a lot of literature around that, and there's a really great friend of mine, Dr. Lindsay Ruiz, who talks a lot about narcissism and leadership, and how there's so many studies that show objectively these are not the traits we want in leaders, but they seem to be the exact ones that end up in a lot of these spots. Sometimes it can be the difference between charisma or confidence versus competence. And so a lot of these folks, they can, if there's like this kind of insecure core and they're seeking outside validation, they tend to work harder at getting it. And so we'll see that in hierarchical kind of environments, like when you were saying in the military, when I was in the State Department, climbing the ladder becomes so much more important. It is a form of validation. In the State Department, we had a horrible expression where someone would kiss up and kick down. And so outwardly, how they present to the folks at the top is very friendly, very charming. They're getting things done. They're really good at self-promoting. And then if you've got this kind of climate of fear where nobody beneath them wants to engage them, overstep them, poke at them by calling them out to higher ups, and that whole system kind of punishes that kind of behavior. There's so many factors that make it really easy for an individual like that to rise up. And so the only counter to that is hard conversation and making sure that you're building your organization in a way where you don't have someone kind of amassing too much power and too much authority, so that if you do have to call them out on bad behavior, it's not harming your organization because you haven't leaned on them too heavily.
That's interesting. What I found out also is that those people are very focused on results, right? So they will do anything, everything to achieve a result, and that includes destroying someone else, and humiliation and these kind of tools, psychological tools they can use. And some organizations are not strong enough to counter this pattern of behaviors. Actually, probably because the culture of the organization itself is so based on results that they don't see the damage that a person like this is really creating.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a damage that you can only assess when the person has left the position, and then you have to, okay, you see the cracks in the wall, and then or the holes in the walls, more than a crack sometimes. That's another aspect of toxic leadership. And I would like to change a little bit because it's getting gloomy, and the weather is not helping probably. Let's try to bring some light to these conversations. And I asked you the moment where you were paralyzed and a greater difficulty, but let me ask you something on the other side. So what is the success of your career? What's the highlight of your career? And most importantly, the one thing that I would like to ask you is what were the factors that contributed to this success? The personal, internal factors, of course.
I think it was engaging my own fear. I really do. I think it was such a pivotal moment that it changed me as a leader, as a human being. It made me less afraid to go forward. And I watch a lot of folks that go through this process. When they get their voice back, the way they show up for the rest of their life is different. People don't mess with them because you're putting off a completely different vibe, so to speak, is I will respond. And that's literally felt by everyone. But I also think it earns you respect and it earns you trust. Like, people may hate you, and I've been in environments where everyone hated me because I was calling out a lot of imbalance of power. But even though there were moments where I was terrified, I could take comfort in feeling like I had integrity, feeling like I wasn't for sale. Like, you gain pieces of yourself back that I think are really important. And then it also kind of gives you permission to engage in spaces. I mean, I've effectively turned like the worst moment of my life into career opportunities. I speak openly about it. I talk about it. I try and help other folks through it. And what I have found was that a lot of times, like the leaders, like when you were talking a moment ago about, it's only after the brilliant jerk leaves or that really bad person leaves that we see the holes in the walls. They actually see it a lot of times. They're just terrified of addressing it. And so the more we come out and talk openly about our shame, our fear, and these kinds of things, the more safety we create for others. And I've had folks who are CEOs say, like on podcasts and quite publicly, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I knew that there was a person who was doing this. And I didn't want to deal with it out of fear and what that might mean for the company. And so courage kind of begets courage. And then the fact that they're owning that now, that they'll engage differently. They'll attract different people to come work at their company because they've shown bravery in this space. And so we're really starting to reach a tipping point where there's kind of like unity around it because it affects millions of people. And so many people, if they're long enough in their career, have gone through these really hard things, and they can kind of lead the way for change out of that direct experience. So I actually see it as kind of two sides of the same coin. That these moments have been really pivotal in helping me grow.
Finding opportunities in
Yeah.
in difficult situations.
Yeah.
That's a skill.
Mm-hmm.
That's a skill that not many people have. You
Or
know.
want, maybe, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people, when they found when they see that everything is going havoc, they get paralyzed and they start playing the victim role,
Yeah.
and that doesn't serve well at all.
No,
Doesn't
and it
serve
always comes
them.
out. It eventually comes out, you know.
What is the thing that you have learned about yourself? The one aspect, or more than one if you want, that you didn't know you had in you, and here you go.
Um, I think fear is our great teacher. And I don't know like the precise words for it, but I have found that if I'm really terrified, that it becomes my North Star now. So if I'm in that situation like I was in that moment where I'm running my boss and my hands are shaking, I now look at that as a good signal that I'm going exactly where I need to go. And when I'm in those moments, I try to ask myself, if I wasn't afraid right now, what would I do? And that's what I do. And I take one step forward and I take one step forward, and I kind of get excited about it now, where I'm like, I can't wait to see what's going to come next. And I do believe at the end of it, no matter what happens short term, no matter what the blowback is, that in the grand scheme of things, life rewards bravery. And I'm way more excited about feeling like a brave person than I am anything else.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting perspective. Looking for the moment you fear whatever
Yeah.
it's happening. That's a lot. And we mentioned earlier, stepping out of the comfort zone. It's like you seek for the moment for it, in which you will be able to finally feel uncomfortable. And absolutely true. That's when we grow. That's when we develop something new skills. Oh, okay, that's. I had a question, and now because I was listening, I was like, oh, that's an amazing story. What is the thing that you fear the most then?
um, of being a coward, of having an opportunity to do something and not doing it. Um, a lot of my fear, because I'm a mom, and so I have a 15-year-old daughter, and even though we fight all the time, and she thinks I'm wrong about everything, I'm very aware that she's watching everything that I do, and I'm just kind of hyper aware of my work in HR could have profound impacts for what the world of work will look like for her. And so, I don't take on the responsibility of planet Earth and, all the things that are going on there. But when I look at my own realm of responsibility and all the challenges that land on my desk every day, fear of not rising to the occasion probably bothers me more than anything. Or, you know, looking at these moments where you're constantly tested on self-preservation, engaging in controversy, which is becoming more and more common for leaders today, where you're going to have to take heavy risk and be prepared to take heavy risk, and that's such a murky space, and it's a hard to untangle space. And I always want to be clear that I'm not letting myself and my own personal gain outweigh what I truly believe is right.
What you just said reminds me why I'm very happy you are here today with us, and that it's I love talking to people like you who want to leave, want to have an impact,
Mm-hmm.
want to leave a mark, doesn't matter how big is it, and of course some people are able to change countries, organizations, international organization and whatever, and other people are able to impact small organization companies, and this is still, I think, a commendable ideal. So what is the when you talk about your daughter, what is the word, leadership perspective that we're leaving to the next generation?
Um, I look at her generation as almost like, I think that they're going to be grand saviors in a lot of respects. I know a lot of people look at them and they're like, oh, they're lazy, they're entitled when they're thinking about Gen Z, and then this new generation that's coming up, Gen Alpha, I think it is, and yes, I can't get her to clean her room or do her homework, so there's an argument for the lazy piece. But at the same time, when you really look at this generation, they're strong. And, a lot of them were born right around 9/11 or afterwards. They've never known a world kind of without conflict. A lot of them were profoundly shaped by the 2008 economic crisis that had huge impacts on their family. Um, they're part of a shrinking generation that is coming into a workforce where a lot of folks are retired out and we don't have folks that are kind of backfilling, and then they're kind of coming to terms with their own potential power and leverage in that moment. But there really are better people. Like, they ask for good things, like I grew up at a time where when your boss said jump, the only response was how high. You didn't question whether it was right or wrong. They're like, why? And we should be asking why. And they're doing amazing things around accountability. I focus quite a bit on, bullying, because I think it does so much harm to folks. But I look at them, and if they get bullied at work, they don't go and look for a support system, or they're not writing that terrified email. They jump on TikTok and, put someone on blast, and 8 million people see it. And they're in there affecting change. And so when I look at my generation as like a woman in her 50s, I just think there's no small acts, that I'm trying to lay the groundwork for these great people behind us. And if I'm just punching a small hole through a wall that will later become a door that they walk through, I feel like I've done my part. And so it's using whatever we've gained at this moment in our life to level the playing field for smart, amazing people to come do awesome things.
I also think that they are more ready to blow the whistle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this makes us, our generation, more aware of our flaws, our problems, because I guess we think, you mentioned earlier, they are accused of being lazy and they don't know what to do, blah blah blah. But we have our flaws, and there are many actually, especially from a leadership side. We are, I guess, I'm talking for myself and the generation that I know, especially in my country, in Italy. But we grow up with the idea of sacrifice and with a leadership style that was more command and control. I'm not talking just the military, because it was pretty much a common practice even outside the military. Of course, the military is probably the best example you can have of command and control. And now all this conversation we have, it's also because they are raising their hand. It's like, no, there's something better, and it's on us. It's on us, because we are preparing the world that they will lead in a few years. Not many, actually. They're already getting there, and some of those people, they're ready to start their own companies. And
oh yeah.
but I like what you say, that they are strong. Behind this appearance of being
not as hardworking as us, or
yeah. But that's a point. I mean, they really aim to a better balance between life and work.
Yeah. No, I agree. And is that so bad? I mean, I've known so many people who endured torturous, work environments, very toxic work environments where they became very sick or they became alcoholics, and, they internalized everything. And, or we worked insane hours just because we thought we were supposed to. We're not producing anything more, but, it was have more face time, be seen, perceived as doing something, and sacrificing more. And I even remember that at the State Department, I remember working such ridiculous hours when I was new, wanting to prove myself and show that, I'll do anything for the organization, to the point where I nearly had a heart attack, and I was only 40. And, and I remember some of the folks were like, oh, like it was a badge of honor, like she'll destroy her own body. Like, oh, wow, you're triple type A. And I'm like, I don't want to be triple type A. I don't want to have a heart attack. I want to see my family. I want these things that they have no question, or no problem asking for.
I really, everything you're saying resonates with me a lot. Quality versus quantity. Working 13, 14, 15 hours is a badge of honor. And actually, if you leave the office even beyond the working hours, but before 8 p.m. was like, oh, why are you going so early?
I know. Shame.
And these silly jokes, and those are silly jokes, and it's not even, sometimes not even a joke. Your boss looks at you, it's like, why are you leaving so early? I mean, it's only dinner time.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And it's, everyone knows that it's unreasonable. Like, people can't function for long periods of time. Like, you're not going to get good quality work out of a burned out individual who can't focus, who hasn't slept. They're not going to be able to, produce good work. And so it ultimately can become a loss for the organization.
Absolutely. Every individual is different. And I guess when we talk about balancing the numbers of hours you spend at work with everything else, it's on you. You might, I know people who really can work 20 hours and they're fine. And they are absolutely happy and satisfied, and man, I'm with you. I'm not going to impose my vision, but I don't want you to impose on me your way of living your life. I value the time with my family as much as I value the time at work. I want to find the right combination. And going to this, so since these new generations are coming in the workforce, what is needed for us to retain talents, acquire and retain talents? What is the one thing or the few things we need for these people to come and work with us and stay with us instead of jumping from one job to another?
We need to treat them better. To me, nearly 50 million Americans have endured a toxic workplace environment. And it's so serious, right? Because there's real health impacts. Now you've got doctors showing that it leaves scars on the brain when you endure workplace trauma. Because when your job's on the line, everything's on the line. Your ability to take care of your family, where you live, how you pay your rent or mortgage, where your kids go to school. So these really heavy stressors have profound impacts on whether people want to stay or not. And one of the failures, and I know that's a strong word to say failures for HR, but I do think so, is, they talk a lot about inclusion, and a lot of times that means food, flag, and funds, like, oh, we're going to throw little parties and we'll have a, ping pong table. But at the end of the day, if you're doing that stuff, but Bob or Jane is this extreme bully who's making everyone's lives hell, and you're not having a conversation with Bob or Jane, that other stuff doesn't matter. And so HR hasn't done enough in that space, I really think. I think that there should be different training. I think there should be different accountability. I think them and managers that they work with need to really own that and make public declarations that they're dedicated to that, and demonstrate that, that if there's a problem, that they will come in and address things immediately. And everybody's run scared from that side of the equation. And so what ends up happening is employees just quit. The number one response is just to go somewhere else. But if we're all just going somewhere else, it's really not changing anything at that point. And so anytime somebody's brave enough to even have one conversation, I think you're changing the world there. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, well, I can see that. And actually, one of the characteristics of this new generation is really to, if they don't like the job where they're in, they just quit and jump to the other. And then there is no fidelity bonus. They don't care.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to humiliate me or treat me badly, then yeah, it's hard to be loyal to an organization like that.
You know what I found in my career that was really surprising when we talk about toxic leadership? There was this person, and then I mentioned this person because, of course, not by name, but this was the example, but I've seen other people doing similar things. This person was working with a boss who was very demanding, and was one of these people, very aggressive, working 16, 17 hours, requiring people to work the same number of hours. The boss was one of, those people who can sleep 3, 4 hours and they're good. So that meant that basically, especially
right, yeah.
right, especially when you are on a ship that you don't have a family, right? So you
That's
can really
war,
work
yeah.
going on and work forever. And this guy working with him was trying to do the same because he felt responsible and his boss was demanding, and he felt sick, seriously ill, for whatever he was doing. The fact that surprised me was not that he felt sick, that he was so loyal to his boss that even when the boss left and had another job, this guy did everything he could to keep working with the same person.
Wow. Yeah.
So there was I don't know how to call it, kind of masochism. I don't know. It's probably because that this boss is gonna have a great career, and you want to be sure that you are in the inner circle, and you want to be rewarded. But man, you are literally killing yourself. I don't know if you ever observed something. It's not the only situation that I observe. I've seen something very similar, more on a psychological level than a physical level. But this guy was physically sick and yet 100% loyal. He would have given his life to this person. And in the military, probably can be seen as a good thing, but it's not. I mean, one thing is dying for your country and in a battle, blah blah blah. Another thing is being killed because your boss is a, I don't want to
demanding
use
person. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I have seen it multiple times, and so basically, there's an acceptance on the part of that individual that this is the only way it can be. That there's no other option here, to put himself through something so extreme, and what's a little bit heartbreaking, not just for that individual that I'm sure suffered for that belief, but no doubt if he did rise up in a system that rewards that behavior, treated other people the same, and we did something recently called the exact cost of a brilliant jerk, to show impacts on productivity. Because if a top boss is mean to a subordinate, that subordinate can't support their subordinates, and how it can bleed down to an organization and how they interact with peers and what can be lost through something like that. So in other words, if you're not physically capable of working 20 hours a day, which most human beings aren't, then everybody's going to struggle in a scenario like that. But what's really interesting is, laws are beginning to change around that, and how we look at workers' comp is starting to change. Years ago, workers' comp was purely, I fell down and broke my leg. It was a slip and fall at work. You're responsible. Make me whole. Now we're starting to see it move into the psychological space in a really profound way. And it started with the pandemic, where, fear and even bullying was now becoming an issue. In fact, when I went through my whole ordeal, I actually filed a workers' comp claim for bullying. And that was really rare. You didn't do it at the time, in part because they're going to open up your entire medical history and, try to say, oh, well, your mom wasn't nice to you as a kid. So this is really what your problem is. It's not us. And so it's considered perilous and you wouldn't get a lot of reward or money for something like that. I did it more to make a statement and to lay a foundation because I had so much documentation showing abuse. I actually had a letter from the organization confirming that after an investigation I was abused. So I wanted that out there in the world. And so, I was able to get a small amount of money for that, but it's precedent setting when each one of these things happens. Now that's going much, much further. And so there was a case recently with an airline pilot who she was a whistleblower. She was like, hey, there's some problems I see with, safety, and I'm really concerned about this. And instead of looking into it, there was backlash. And so they were just very cruel to her, hurt her career, spread rumors about her. And she won an award of 500 million, half a million, 500,000 just for emotional abuse. And so this world is beginning to change. In fact, there's a couple of bills out there now. One of them is called the Workplace Psychological Safety Act in Massachusetts. And so it's with the House. And if this passes, it would become the first anti-bullying law in the country where it allows employees to have a cause of action against an employer purely for workplace abuse. And so we already have these in countries like France. There's a lot of other countries that have implemented this. The United States has not. But, I think if this passes in Massachusetts, we'll see it quickly pass in a lot of other areas. It's already passed the Senate in Rhode Island, and it's about to come up in New York City. So I see things beginning to shift and change in a positive way.
And that's a trend that I like. Mm-hmm. And there are many tools. We mentioned some of the tools that a person can use, but I want to play the devil's advocate a little bit. What if a disgruntled person, being that probably is not very capable and has seen their career not rewarded as they thought? What if this person tries to use these tools as an act of revenge against their boss, even if their boss are not the bad? I'm not saying good, but not the bad.
Yeah.
It's still good.
Yeah. No, what you're referring to is it's weaponizing the process,
right?
And it's not uncommon. We'll see it a lot in HR where this person's been given a PIP or they've been given a verbal warning. They're sensing that they might be held accountable for something. So to protect themselves, they'll go out and file a claim against you. I probably shouldn't be saying this out loud, but I actually love that when that happens. And part of the reason why is the best counter for that is, okay, let's open an investigation. We'll have somebody come in from the outside, really dig into what's going on. And what always comes to light is the performance. Like there's no escaping it. I have personally had people file complaints against me when I have called them out for their behavior. And I was not afraid of that. And the reason why I wasn't afraid of it is because I bend over backwards to treat people well. And it was extremely well documented. I had plenty of emails where I had gone through saying, hey, thank you for having a conversation with me. This is just to document what's happened. Hey, I have concerns here. Here's all the list of complaints. This is, and so if you're doing all of that, there's nothing to fear. And then what happens is that employee will never do that again. And a lot of times more things that you didn't even know come out for that employee that makes things even more challenging for them because we have a fair, objective process. None of us want to live in a world where you can just say, hey, that person's bad and they're fired. There always should be due process in that. And all that stuff exists. It exists in the discrimination world. And so it would simply be applying in a broader context.
And also this allows the process, the structure to prove itself. It works when you find out of someone who is, using your words, weaponizing the tool, and you point it out. It means the system works.
Exactly. Yeah. And in both ways, send a message to your workforce. Like if in my organization, if somebody is hurting someone else, I, as the VP, I will be on the phone. I will call you in 5 minutes. I will address this, and we will take corrective action. And I would never speak about those direct instances. I would never betray those confidences. But your employees know when something's been addressed or when it hasn't. And likewise, if somebody weaponizes the process and it doesn't go well with them, and more, and things come out that that's just exactly what they were doing, that word too will get out, and it will send a message to other potential bad actors or people who were thinking about doing the same thing. Oh, I don't want to go through that, or I don't want to expose myself if things aren't really clean.
Let's reverse the conversation. Let's stay on the tool. Let's say that the organization those are inside internal tools, right? So it's the organization who has a structure. What if the organization feels like they need to protect a boss because he's an achiever or she's an achiever, and they don't want to lose her, and despite they're really not, they are quite toxic.
Mm-hmm.
How can you avoid these kind of situations?
So documenting and making sure that that's known. I will have those I've had to open investigations into my own bosses. They don't love it. They get pretty angry.
Who loves it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That would be weird. Oh, come in.
And so, but so from the inside HR perspective, how I go about this is, here's the liability to the company. We treat everyone the same. The rules are the same. And then I try and bring in outside examples as leverage points. Like, there's a news story every day in this country, especially after Harvey Weinstein. You had hundreds of executives who lost their jobs, and they didn't just lose their jobs. Like, it didn't just end their career. It hurt their organizations. Stock prices drop, and then you can start to see things now becoming more common. Shareholder derivative suits, where shareholders can sue a board of directors if they knew that an executive was engaging in destructive behaviors and did nothing about it, because you've now hurt their pocketbook. And so they have a cause of action against you. In some states, just a breach of contract. If we have in our employee handbook that we're going to follow rules and follow up, and we do it for a janitor, but we don't do it for, a top executive, we're violating our own rules, and someone can sue us for a breach of contract. So it's reminding, that the outside world has leverage that may not exist in the inside world. And so what I like to advise people, like, you're just a regular, Jane the accountant employee, documenting those things quite clearly, but making known that you're aware that, a jury in Texas just awarded, was it like $366 million for one discrimination case against FedEx? Does the company want to deal with that, or do they want to address that guy now? And so pulling those points in to say, this is real, this is very serious. It allows HR to carry that message forward, like, hey, this complainant knows their stuff. Do you want to go here? And then they'll weigh their responses a little bit differently. And but you're right. The natural instinct is to protect the executive more than the regular employee, not just because they're brilliant. Sometimes they're not, but because the liability is greater. If a janitor does something wrong, they'll fire him on the spot. And if you don't, and they sue you because the janitor was mean, it's a small payout. For the CEO, somebody's writing a much bigger check. So they're going to want to prevent that.
Absolutely. It's a matter also of credibility. And, that's, for some companies, it's very important. Mm-hmm. You need to sell your product. One of the things that I really like about this conversation is how we pointing out is how leaders are responsible of many things. They're responsible for their team. They're responsible for the task. They're responsible for a company. But what they are responsible, even if some of them, they really don't understand this, is they're really responsible for the well-being of the people they work with. Mm-hmm. And it's huge, the impact they can have on their team members, as individuals. It can be huge. It can be really a matter of, as we discussed earlier, physical well-being other than mental well-being. And we neglect sometimes this, and we think it's less important than the task. So, we prefer to do something, probably pressing more on people to achieve the task. But we don't, because the effects of this action are not immediate. While the task, the result is reached on the spot, tomorrow this will be done. What you don't see is the effect on the people.
Right.
Because those effects are in the long run. Because the burnout is something that you will see not tomorrow. Not even after tomorrow. You're gonna see in a week, in a month, in a year. The distress that you're causing is gonna leave even a deeper mark, because recovering from the burnout doesn't take one day.
Right.
It takes a lot. And that's what leaders need to understand. I'm sorry, there was also because we've been talking about toxic leadership, and a lot of things came to my mind and my experience. I mean, and things that I've done myself as a leader. Sometimes you push if you're the commanding officer of a ship, you push your crew to achieve a result. But then the effects of this action are immense. People will lose trust on you. What's worse than that?
Oh yeah, no, that's pretty serious, because it bleeds into so many things, and you stop hearing people's best ideas. They stop coming to you with the real problems, and you can't fix things if you don't know what's really going on. And so there's a lot of cracks there. And but I like what you just said, and I think there's a lot of conversation that's starting to come about that, in part from Gen Z too. If you go back several decades, when you look at work, it was all about using stuff to make other stuff. It was all about physical products. And so all the focus was on the physical products. And then we kind of shift into the 80s, where we really start looking at shareholder value and like, what do we do to give people more money who invest, and we reward them so they invest more in our companies. And a lot of that was looking at human beings in those environments was all about cost containment, so that you increase profits by keeping that low. But we are now existing in a world where all your value comes from thoughts. It comes from people and the ideas that they bring and the way they solve challenges and the way they look at worlds. So we're entering this age of kind of not shareholder value or stuff, but human value. And so the companies that are nicer to their people are going to win in a scenario like that. People are going to feel safe enough to say, I have this crazy idea out here that can make us millions of dollars. In a company where everybody's scared, you're not going to hear that, and so people are starting to recognize some of that, and conversely, like, hey, this is a real problem that's going to impact you long term on your workforce. Good leaders are open and create enough of that psychological safety to really hear that and hopefully address it.
And that's the perfect, and it was a segue for the last question actually, Kim. And thank you, first of all, for everything you said. I think talking about toxic leadership in such a comprehensive way is always useful. And that's because probably we don't understand, as I said earlier, the impact of it, and as you also mentioned, and the tools that we can use when we find ourselves in a place where our boss is really a bad boss. So leaving this conversation, let me ask you, what are the suggestions that we can give to people to be better leaders? If someone comes to you and say, hey Kim, I want to be a good leader, not a toxic one, a good leader, what's the suggestion you will give to this person?
I think demonstrating empathy, openness, and courage. I remember there was one place where I came into work, and it was, you could feel the fear everywhere. That, I was replacing someone who was a bad boss, who had treated people poorly, who threw everyone under the bus to save himself. just did so many things wrong that you could just almost sense the PTSD, and people didn't have a lot of trust. And so I put out a mantra of everything we do is guided by courage and kindness. And it does, and in those kind of environments, it can take a lot of courage to be kind. And we want to recognize that and value that. And one of the first acts I did was to pull everyone together and to basically ask them to murder board me, to say, bring me your complaints. What are you most upset about? And I stood there and I took it. I didn't get defensive. I was just very calm. And in some cases, if somebody was really emotional or it was really heated, I'd just say, try again. How about asking me like this? What's another way you could ask that? Good. I heard you. Let's see what we can do to fix that. And just being that example of, we don't have to be afraid of this stuff. Like, just get in there, show them we can do it. And likewise, when something is really wrong, say, oh yeah, I really screwed up on that one. And I'm going to screw up, and you joke. And I don't want you to be afraid to screw up either. I'm not going to step on your neck when that happens. Just like I hope you don't step on mine, and so demonstrating that as quickly as possible, can really begin to earn back some trust in that environment, and just set up a new day, where this is who we're going to be now, and this is who I want to be for you, and having enough vulnerability to really go deep in that and talk about that, because vulnerability is also a form of courage too.
It is, and that's beautiful to say. So thank you very much, Kim, for the conversation we had. As I said, we had touched upon a topic that I like because it's important, and your insights and experience has proved to be very valuable in this conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.